Hello, everyone. I welcome you to this new series on the efficiency of markets. In the previous lectures, we've had the opportunity to look at how markets work, and we were not much focused on whether the allocation of resources done by the market or via the market mechanism was efficient or not. And so we'll take a look at this in this new series. And so we'll have three parts. In the first part, we'll look at the concept of consumer surplus, which measures an aspect of the total surplus in the market, which is an indicator of the efficiency of the market, actually. In the second part, we'll look at producer surplus, which is the second aspect or the second component of total surplus. And then in the third part of this series, we'll look at how we can improve the efficiency of the market. So let's begin today's lecture. So in this lecture, we'll look for answers to the following questions. The first one is, what is consumer surplus? And how is it related to demand? Secondly, what is the producer surplus? And how is it related to the supply curve? And lastly, do markets produce a desirable allocation of resources? Or could markets' outcome be improved upon? So we'll start the lecture by looking at welfare economics. And so we'll recall that in the previous lectures, when we talked of the allocation of resources, we referred to how much of each good is produced, which producers produce it, and which consumers consume it. And so in welfare economics, we are interested in how the allocation of resources affect economic well-being. And we'll look first at the well-being of consumers. And then subsequently, we'll look at the well-being of producers. And to start this, I want to touch on a few concepts. The first one is the concept of willingness to pay. And we'll define willingness to pay for a good as the maximum amount the buyer is willing to pay for that good. So willingness to pay measures how much a buyer values the good. So let's look at this demand schedule for 4 individuals as an example. So you have Anthony, Chad, Flea, and John. And the figures in the table represents their willingness to pay. And here, the good we are talking about is iPod. So then, Anthony's willingness to pay for this iPod is $250. Chad's willingness to pay is $175. Flea's willingness to pay is $300. And John's willingness to pay is $125. So a question arises. If price of iPod is $200, who will buy an iPod? And what is quantity demanded? So from this demand schedule, our answer would be Anthony and Flea will buy an iPod, Chad and John will not. The reason is that Anthony and Flea's willingness to pay is over and above the $200 price of the iPod. And Chad and John's willingness to pay is below the price of the iPod. And hence, quantity demanded will be 2 when price is $200. Now let's look at how we can derive the demand schedule. So when price is above $300, no one buys the iPod, and so quantity demanded is zero. When price is between $251 and $300, it is only Flea who can purchase the iPod, or it is only Flea who wants to purchase the iPod at that price. And so quantity demanded is 1. When price is between $176 and $250, Anthony and Flea are willing to purchase the iPod, and so quantity demanded is 2. When price is $126 and $175, 3 of the 4 can purchase the iPod, and so quantity demanded is 3. And when the price is between $0 and $125, all 4 of these individuals can purchase the iPod, and so quantity demanded is 4. Now let's plot this data on the graph. So when price is above $300, quantity demanded is 0. And we can see that when price is $300 or up to $300, quantity demanded is actually 1. When price is between $176 and $250, quantity demanded is 2. And when price is between $126 and $175, quantity demanded is 3. And when price is up to $125, all 4 of them can purchase it. So what do we see? We see that the demand curve looks like a staircase with 4 steps, 1 per buyer. So if there were a huge number of buyers, as in a competitive market, there would be a huge number of very tiny steps. And it would look more like a smooth curve instead of the steps. So at any quantity, the height of the demand curve is the willingness to pay of the marginal buyer. The buyer who would leave the market if price were any higher. So we can see from this graph that Flea's willingness to pay is 300, Anthony's willingness to pay is 250, Charles' willingness to pay is 175, and John's willingness to pay is 125. So then, what is consumer surplus? This is the second concept I want to introduce to you. And we will define consumer surplus as the amount a buyer is willing to pay minus what the buyer actually pays. And I'll repeat this. The consumer surplus is the amount a buyer is willing to pay minus what the buyer actually pays. So mathematically, we can express consumer surplus as CS is equal to willingness to pay minus the price. So let's look at the demand schedule once again. So suppose price is $260. Then Flea's consumer surplus is going to be $40 because Flea is willing to pay $300 and yet the price is $260. And so Flea is going to save $40. Sorry. And we will realize that the others get no consumer surplus because they do not buy an iPod at this price. And that is because the price is higher than their willingness to pay. So the total consumer surplus at this point then is $40 and is equivalent or is equal to Flea's consumer surplus. So we can see Flea's consumer surplus as a shaded area in the graph. Now, if price is now $220, then what is Flea's consumer surplus? We can see that Flea's consumer surplus increases to $80 because he can now buy the good at a much cheaper price. And so if he's willing to pay $300 and the price is $220, then his consumer surplus is $80. Anthony's consumer surplus is going to be $30. And this is the difference between his willingness to pay of $250 and the price of $220. So the total surplus between Flea and Anthony is going to be 110, which is the sum of their individual consumer surpluses, which in this case is 80 plus 30. So what is the lesson so far? So total consumer surplus equals the area under the demand curve above the price from 0 to quantity. So let's look at the consumer surplus with lots of buyers and a smooth demand curve. Okay, so there's a graph, there's a Cartesian plane with the y-axis being the price per pair of shoes, and then the x-axis is a quantity in thousands of pairs of shoes. So this is our demand curve as shown in the graph. At quantity is equal to 5,000 pairs of shoes, the marginal buyer is willing to pay $50 for a pair of shoes. So suppose the price is $30. Then his consumer surplus is $20 because his willingness to pay is 50, the price is lower at a price of 30. So the difference is the consumer surplus. Now, consumer surplus is effectively the area between the price and the demand curve from 0 to the demand curve, to quantity, sorry. And so we can see in this diagram that the area under the demand curve, or the area bounded by the demand curve, price, and 0 up to the quantity area is effectively a triangle. And so to find the consumer curve, the consumer surplus, we'll find the area of this triangle. And we know from our mathematics class that the area of a triangle is half times the base of the triangle times the height of the triangle. And so from the example, the height of this triangle is 30, and it's the difference between the highest point on the vertical axis, which is 60, and the price of 30. In this case, 60 is a willingness to pay, and 30 is the price of the item. Now, the base is the distance, or the horizontal distance, from 0 to the quantity. In this case, quantity at the price of 30 is 15. And so our consumer surplus is half times the base of 15 times the price of 30, which gives us $225. Now, we would also realize that when prices increase, consumer surplus reduces. And we'll show this using this diagram. So let's say if price increases from $30 to $40, we can see that quantity reduces from 15 to 10. So what is the consumer surplus? Now we can see that the difference between the willingness to pay and the price is no longer 30, it is now 20. And the quantity, which is also the base, is now 10 instead of 50. And so the total consumer surplus in this case is $100. So it has reduced from $225 to $100. And there are two reasons for the fall in the consumer surplus, as we would see. So the first one has got to do with the area shaded blue. And we can see that there's a fall in consumer surplus due to buyers leaving the market. So originally or initially, there were buyers in the market when the price was 30. When the price increased to 40, these buyers could no longer afford, and so they left the market. And this is one of the reasons why the consumer surplus declines. The second reason is due to the rectangular area shaded green. And the fall in consumer surplus is due to the remaining buyers paying higher prices. So remember, when the price was 30, there was higher savings compared to when the price was 40. And so this reduction in savings effectively affects the consumer surplus. At this point, let's have a look at this active learning example. So we are required to find the marginal buyer's willingness to pay at quantity is equal to 10. We are also required to find the consumer surplus when the price is 30. And then suppose price falls to 20, how much will consumer surplus increase due to one, the buyers entering the market and existing buyers paying a lower price? Let's look at the answers. So at quantity is equal to 10, we realize that the marginal buyer's willingness to pay is 30. And we can find this by tracing from quantity is 10 on the horizontal axis up to the point where it hits the demand curve. And then we read from the vertical axis what the price will be. And we can see that as we trace it up and we hit the demand curve and we read from the corresponding price, we can see that the willingness to pay at that point is $30. B, the consumer surplus when the price is 30 is effectively $50. So once again, we can see that when the price is 30, the willingness to pay is 40 and the quantity is 10. And so the height is the difference between the willingness to pay of 40 and the price of 30, which is effectively $10. Now the base is the horizontal distance from 0 to the quantity, which is 10. And so our consumer surplus is half times 10 times 10, which gives us 50. Now when price falls to 20, we can see that quantity increases from 10 to 20. And this increment in quantity is due to new buyers or additional buyers entering the market. And these additional buyers are equal to 10. So, and the new height, as we can see, is the difference between the initial price of 30 and the new price of 20. The difference is actually 10. And so the consumer surplus for the additional buyers is also 50. And then there's also going to be an increase in consumer surplus on the initial 10 units. Why? Because those who were already buying it can now afford to buy it at a cheaper price. And this is represented by the rectangular area shaded green here. And we can see that the area of a rectangle is the length times the breadth. And so the length, as we can see, is the difference between the initial price and the new price. The initial price is 30, the new price is 20. The difference is $10. And the horizontal distance from 0 to the initial quantity is also 10. So the breadth is also 10. And so the area under the rectangle is 10 times 10, which brings us to $100. So let's summarize part 1 of this lecture. We realize that the height of the demand curve reflects the value of the good to buyers, which is their willingness to pay for it. Consumer surplus is the difference between what buyers are willing to pay for the good and what they actually pay. On the graph, consumer surplus is the area between price and the demand curve.